Welcome, everyone, to MSP Tutor, the show that teaches MSPs something useful. I'm your host, Steve Taylor. Today, I'm joined by Chris Keith, founder and CEO of, I forgot to ask you, it's Hirexe, right?
Hirexe, yes, sir.
All right, you tricked me because it looks like hire and then exe for executable file.
Right.
Was that intentional?
It was intentional, yeah. So at Hirexe, I'm creating a new hiring experience. And one of the things that we want to do is execute how quickly the current hiring process takes. So I'm really impressed that that's the play on words. You nailed it. So we'll get more into all that, but that's a good start, Steve.
Wonderful. So let's talk about hiring, man, because this is something that I don't know. A lot of MSPs just struggle with this, right? What have you found most common as far as challenges that MSPs are facing in hiring? I think the biggest thing I'm finding is they can't find the right talent.
Yeah. So I don't think that this is something that's unique to MSPs, right? I would almost take a macro approach and scale out a little bit. I think if this is something broad, all businesses, all managers, all business owners essentially have this problem. And I think post COVID, right? The workplace has changed. That's number one. Their talent wants a little bit more flexibility in some circumstances, so you don't have to go into the office anymore. That's one thing. I think number two, it's tough finding people, and throughout all of my chats when I was first starting Hirexe, so this would have been late last year. I talked to a ton of MSP owners because obviously, that's the world that I come from and what I'm intimately familiar with. And frankly, Steve, I guess these were the three things that people kept bringing up to me. And that was, number one, we want to find qualified talent. So those are folks that have been in the industry before, are familiar with the space, that I don't have to train up from 0 to 1. Again, that's different if someone's younger and if they're just coming out of school or something like that. But you want people that are qualified and then qualified for the job that they're being asked to do. So there's a difference between, let's just say, marketing at an enterprise level at a large company versus marketing for an MSP, right? There are pieces of lingo that you need to be familiar with. There are certain paths or channels that are going to be successful or work in the MSP space that aren't going to work in these other spaces. So my MSP owner says, they need to be familiar and they need to have chops for the role and know the space. That's number one. And then number two, I want them to have that it quality, right? And that it quality it's tough to articulate because it's different for different businesses, it's different for different cultures, it's different for different direct managers. But it's a bit of a mixture between, I want this person to have the right personality, I want them to have the right work ethic, I want them to be collaborative and play with my team. I want them to have that it factor. And oh, by the way, I want them to be technically savvy, right? Which is oftentimes something that we have to be very familiar with.
So they want a unicorn.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So in a perfect world, right? But I think, look, the biggest problems, I think, with every business, it all comes down to who problems, right? It's oftentimes not what. So I tell people, you should be looking for unicorns when you're going out to hire, right? Because it's important. That's your business. So that's number one was, okay, they have to be qualified for the role. And there's a bunch that goes into that. Number two, want to have that it factor. So we're searching for unicorn-esque. And then number three, be reasonably priced, because the reality is, particularly here in the US, right? If people check boxes 1 and 2, Steve, they know it, and they demand a crazy high price, which sometimes you can justify, but oftentimes, in our space and it's harder to do that. So I would say those are the three things that I chat with people, or that commonly come up, that I coach people either personally one-on-one and stuff like this, or my business is able to help folks out with, because those are the biggest pain points.
Perfect. So now we're going to Tarantino this. We're going to rewind all the way back to the beginning. I'm going to assume that if you're watching this, you've at least done some preliminary research. You understand what it's going to cost you to hire somebody, not just in the salary, but in the taxes and benefits and unemployment and all that other stuff that it costs you to hire somebody. I also assume that um, you may not have an onboarding procedure, but you at least understand some things like, oh, I'm going to have to get this guy licensing for my PSA, or set them up in my RMM, get them Microsoft 365, buy them a laptop, so on and so forth. Okay, so we're going to skip all of that because I assume you figured that out. You're just looking to level up your current hiring practices. All right. So now that we've kind of set the groundwork here, let's start with uh, chicken or the egg. We have to like figure out what we want to hire, right? So we know we want to hire. Let's just say we want to hire an L3 guy. We want to go big.
Yep.
So we need to write a job description. Let's assume we've had one. We're not happy with the results we've gotten in the past, and we're just going to blow it away and write a whole new one. And this will work great for if you don't have one yet. Okay. So what elements should like definitely be included in a job description?
Certainly. So what I would recommend, where you start off with is, I think imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, right? So if there are, because look, all of us in this space talk to one another, right? We have really good friends that are, if I'm operating in the New York City market, someone that's operating in Texas or maybe over in LA, something like that. So what I would first do is potentially look at, if you know someone that has a great job description, like just ask them or see if you can find one, right? Because you don't have to start at ground zero. I'm also just going to throw this out there too, because we use it as a template. I think Chat GPT or any sort of Gen AI that you use is a great way to, number one, establish a framework, and then you can iterate it from there. I think that's like those are great bones to start in. But what I really focus on with job description is number one, don't agonize over it, but you want to very quickly weed people out or get people to know that aren't applicable. So almost think of reframing the job descriptions to doing just that. So of course this changes from role to role, right? But let's go with the L3 route, because that's what you brought up, and I think it's a great example. What you want to focus on with the job description is the technologies that they're going to be using most prevalently, and where their time is going to be spent. The majority of time is going to be spent as well. So if you're standardized on, let's say, Datto is your backup, your ConnectWise with the RMM and all those sorts of things. Potentially like CrowdStrike is what you were using. Shout out to CrowdStrike, because they just it's been a tumultuous week or so for the entire industry. But what I would first say is whatever that individual is going to be spending the most time on, make sure that that's what you're calling out. And then I would associate a percentage of time that's being spent with that role. So I think where a lot of people fall short is they'll write these job descriptions. And for entry-level jobs, you can write an entry-level job description that's just high level. But for something like an L3, you want to be as specific as possible, both on the technology side and then where time is going to be spent. Because if I'm a job seeker and I'm looking at this role and, man, I really like the technical details, and I see on the job description that Steve says, hey, here at Channel Program in this particular job, you're actually going to be on the phone with people 80% of the time. The 20% spent on the technology is just you being familiar with it. I'm going to realize, I'm probably not a great fit for this, because I'd rather be flipping it around and spend 80% of my time working with the tech, and then 20% on the phone if I really have to, that sort of a thing. So that's what I would say is really big on the job description side. As far as like the day-to-day role goes, add those percentages as to where people's time is going to be spent. And then of course, highlight the specific technologies or the skill set that's going to be most important for that. What I would also put in, and I think a lot of people don't do this, is throw in the key performance indicators or the metrics that you're going to hold this person accountable to. So number one, make sure that you know that as a manager, right? It's because I talk to a lot of people, Steve, right? And a lot of folks have that sort of stuff ironed out, but a lot of them don't. So what I would say, or what I think is really important, is I think like misaligned. I always joke around, like misaligned expectations are the root of all like all conflict. So if you have those metrics, and hey, you let people know this is exactly what you're going to, like, these are the metrics that you're going to be accountable towards. Number one, that makes for a really nice interview conversation and setting the table there, and then you can talk about it more specifically. But number two, if those are metrics that people aren't comfortable with, my background's sales and growing out go to market strategies. If I'm hiring a BDR and I want that BDR to make 150 dials a day, and that's one of the metrics that I'm going to be holding, her accountable to. If she sees that and it scares her away, then we're saving each other both a ton of time by her not applying for the role, right? So that's what I would say is definitely on those posts, have the metrics, let people know exactly what success looks like, and then be as granular as possible. Just helps.
That's amazing. So let's talk about the polar opposite. What should absolutely be avoided in job descriptions?
Yeah, I think, oh, geez, that's a good question. I think there's really not a ton that you want to absolutely avoid on the job descriptions. What I would just say is like anything that's going to be potentially controversial, right? I would probably leave those off. Just be as specific as you can with the role itself, and then with the company, I would just leave that. I think one of the things that you definitely want to do on the company side is let people know what the culture looks like, right? Because that's just another thing that you can do that saves all parties involved the potential time. What I really like is when I guess like one thing to avoid, or the polar opposite, would be, don't just copy and paste something that you did get from Chat GPT, right? Or don't copy and paste directly what your competitor put up that you like. What you want to do is specify, like, write that in your voice or in your company's voice. And I understand it might be too heavy of a lift or too much of an ask for every hiring manager to rewrite it in their own voice. But what I do think is important is you have some sort of a section in that job description that describes, okay, here's what the company culture looks like. This is the type of person that we're looking like too. And you can get a feel for what that culture or the voice of the either the owner of the company, if that's a person who's driving like the mission and the direction, or the hiring manager or the team that you're going to be on. I think by leaving it too cookie cutter, too vanilla, think about it too. Like the best, much like we're looking for unicorns, like in with candidates themselves. If you're a good candidate, you're looking for unicorn employers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anything that you can do to stand out from like the just droning on, we need 5 years of experience here, and we need you to be, articulate and well-spoken, and, in verbal and written communications, anything that you can stand out, that is recognizable and shows people, ooh, like maybe that's a little bit edgy, or ooh, these guys really care. Like that sort of a thing is important. I guess like a specific example I could just give is S1 Technology. My good friend Hunter, they operate down in Louisiana. I'm going to butcher exactly what their mission is, but it's something along the lines of like, we're looking for badass people who work hard and really care about getting to the best solution in the least amount of time possible in the most efficient way, or something like that. So I think just that quick little mission statement shows, ooh, wow, like these guys are operators.
Okay. That's a really cool mission statement too. Butchered or not, I understand what they're going for.
Right.
All right. So we've talked about writing the job description. Where do we post it? Like, is Indeed the best place? LinkedIn? Do we post it in multiple places?
Yeah. So the answer is like as most frequently or everywhere that you can. What I will say is, like, to each their own. There's a bunch of good platforms out there, and whatever I would say, like, whatever momentum you or HR has currently, just stick with that, assuming that it's working.
Mm-hmm.
Me personally, if you're just going strictly by raw numbers, LinkedIn has the most potential eyeballs that are going to see it, right? So they have the most users. But I do know, like, ZipRecruiter is really big in the space. Indeed is solid as well. Another thing that you definitely want to do is make sure that you're posting that like directly. What I would say is not just from like a high level company type of page, but if the business owner is comfortable with it or the hiring manager is comfortable with it, Steve, when that person can share it with their network, that's where the magic starts to really happen too. And it might not always be from like just the high level, like, number of applicants perspective, but man, oftentimes the best folks that we could get, the best employees, the best candidates, they come from warm referrals. So anything that we can do to put ourselves in a position where our network knows, even if they're not necessarily people that we'd be looking to hire, but they're people that know people that might be looking to get hired by us. That's something that I would definitely recommend, because getting those warm referrals or just letting your network know that you're expanding, business is going well. Not only does it add, more potential candidates that come in, it's those warm referrals, but it just facilitates positive conversations about your business and everything that's happening there too. So I would just, anytime that you're growing and expanding, that's a good thing, right? Like, don't just act like that's because a lot of businesses aren't, right? So take advantage, personally, from like a personal brand. And then of course, like, that just bleeds over into the business brand recognition building, but try to get that out, I think, yourself too. It just makes sense.
Now, one of the things I've found is that some, not all, but some jobs on LinkedIn have a lot of applicants. I'm talking thousands,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a really sweet sounding gig. Like something at, well, I'm just going to name drop a job at PAX 8 where it's 100% remote, and they get this great hiring package and benefits package and just all the perks of working for a big company. You're going to probably see that job position, depending on what the role is, it's going to have like 800 applicants or 1,700 applicants or something ridiculous. Like, I didn't even know there were that many people in the IT industry.
Yeah.
But yet there are, and then you'll find and now it doesn't matter if it's PAX 8 or not. You'll find that when you have a job that is highly desired,
Yep.
Like you, for example, Chris, I think you do not outsourced staff augmentation.
Yep.
For MSPs, and your staff are located where?
So I'm the only full-time U.S. employees, but I have a handful of folks over in South Africa as well.
That was the question I meant. So the people that you're augmenting the MSP staff with are South African.
Yes.
And so for you, it's great. You've got people that want to get into this remote gig, right? So you probably get a bunch of applicants, and like 80% of them aren't even qualified. So how do you figure that out quickly without wasting a bunch of your time? Please, there's an app, right?
Well, I guess the short answer is there's not an app that does that, but my company, I'm literally building the solution to that problem, because that was the biggest issue that I've ran into in any business that I've built or scaled, right? So I guess specifically, this is just, I feel like you brought up, Steve, and this is anyone who's ever hired has felt this pain, right? Is, I think when you're new to hiring, you put up the job, and it could be on LinkedIn, or it could be on Indeed or whatever, and your fingers are just crossed. You're like, oh, like, I hope I get some applicants here. Like, I really need this role filled. Like, it's time. We probably should have hired for this weeks ago, maybe months ago. I hope stuff comes in. And sure enough, because this is exactly what I ran into, with the current roles, or even at my last company, or over at Zorus, as we were building out the go-to-market team. Like you said, it was a software. We had just raised money. It was 2021, and we were expanding, and and we could work remote. So I remember I posted the job and just essentially let it run for a day, was running over. And I checked back 24 hours later. And in that 24 hours, I'd gotten 1,250 applicants or something like that. And all of a sudden it goes from excited to, oh my, this is going to be
overwhelming
work. It's a lot of work. Right.
Yeah.
So
So I'm sorry to cut you off, but one of the things that I would always hear from friends and blogs is, when you're putting together your resume and your cover letter, you want to make sure you hit all the keywords that they have in their job description, so that way the software picks your resume out and gives it. So that's what I meant by, is there an app for this?
Yeah. So there are, and I think what LinkedIn actually does a nice job of screening a handful of those options out for you. I think another thing that you want to make sure that you're doing, and we chatted about this at the beginning of the call, right, was the non-negotiables, the must-have for these roles. You can actually specify those when you post jobs, whether it is Indeed or LinkedIn or wherever. You must have prior experience using, Kaseya, like on the PSA side, or you do have to have familiarity, or you have to have been in the MSP industry for at least 3 to 5 years or something like that. So oftentimes what you find is, let's say that we got those 1,000 to 1,200 applicants or so, that very quickly gets whittled down to maybe half of those are actually checking off those boxes that are most important. Right?
Okay, that's helpful.
Very helpful.
That makes, obviously you still gotta take a bite out of that elephant,
Mm-hmm.
but now it's a baby elephant.
Exactly. Yeah, and that is the only way to consume an elephant, right? Is one bite of a time. So
I swear PETA is like knocking on my door now or something, probably. I just said we're going to eat a baby elephant. I'm sorry, guys. I don't mean it literally.
Exactly. But I do think once you're at that level, then it does, then there is some sort of, necessary screening that goes into it. And I think that this is a product that, frankly, that we're working on completely automating or productizing on our side is, okay, going through those hundreds of candidates now instead of thousands and seeing, okay, do they actually check all the boxes, and then like doing some additional reach outs to see, okay, are they going to be a fit? Do they have that it factor, and how can we progress them, forward? So generally, like what my team does to the people that we deem as, hey, this makes sense, and they check all the initial boxes, we're asking them a handful of questions. Now is when we start the personal reach out. So you could do this via, overseas, we use a ton of WhatsApp. You can do this via email, anything that you can do just to very quickly touch base with people. Because I think, Steve, what you want to do at the top of the funnel, right, is get people to know really quickly. So at this level, it's not about finding that unicorn. It's finding out, okay, this person's not going to be a fit for this reason or that reason. So the quicker that you can get people to a no, the better. So what we then do is actually we send them a very specific message or email that tells them to follow a handful of steps to get to the next round. And you'd be surprised, over half of those people fall at you because they don't read the email, or they don't submit everything that we're looking for. So that right there weeds them out. So there are little tips and tricks that you can then do to start optimizing and kind of, weeding people out, getting them to that no sooner than later.
That's a really good idea. And if you guys see me like shifting around a lot or wincing or bouncing, it's because my back is in excruciating pain today, guys. I'm not looking for sympathy. I just want you to know that's why I look weird or funny today. Okay. So
I hadn't even noticed, Steve, but now I'll be
okay, good. Now you're gonna be like, is that it? Is that what he's talking about? Like, all right, let's talk about applicant tracking. Some companies will say they have like an applicant tracking system that they've built or that they've purchased or whatever. How can we set up an applicant tracking system? If we're using LinkedIn, do we need one? Like,
yeah. So I would err on the side. I mean, every MSP is different, and depending on the size of the organization, it may or may not make sense. I'd say if you're over maybe 50 folks or so, or if you're hiring, over 5 to 10 people a year, then it likely makes sense to set up your own applicant tracking system. If you're under that, it probably doesn't, because it's just, think about like any sort of software that we bring on. Like, I think one of the jokes I always make, Steve, especially in this particular space, like in the hiring in general, is, or just I guess just software. We have a little bit of software fatigue, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it is people management, whatever it may be. I think like simplification is key, and no one's really looking for additional tools. What they're looking for is like help making decisions, right, or simplifying things. So what I would recommend is just like on a per hire basis. Again, you're under the 50 head count, or you're not making more than 5 hires. It's probably better to just have a very, very specific, system that you follow. So, okay, this is how we post the job description. Here are the job boards that we're going to post the role. Here are the questions that we're going to ask. Here's exactly what that process looks like. I think having that ironed out, and it could just be as simple as having it. And I have templates along these lines that I'm happy to share with the audience and listeners. But I think having that is kind of like step one. I think if you overanalyze or get really into an applicant tracking system, they're good, but they're really good for massive companies that are hiring hundreds to thousands of people a year. I'd say like for most MSPs in this space, just getting the basics knocked out and having those that like the standard operating procedures, if you will, for okay, when we hire, this is exactly what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably most valuable.
Now, me, I am I'm an over planner, I believe is the technical term. So what I would do is I would create like an Excel spreadsheet that, the first column can be all the applicants' names. And then every column after that is kind of like my criteria.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have, and I might color code a bunch of columns, because like these 7 columns were that email that you mentioned where they have to reply and they have to include this and include that and so on and so forth in order to be moved to the next whatever, to the next part of the process.
Yep.
So I might have all those columns, and then I might just put a Y or N or whatever for people that did or did not meet those expectations, just so that way I can keep track. Because my fear as an over planner is that nobody's going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. So I have to find the closest thing.
Yeah.
So sure, this person missed on 2, but they missed on 2 out of 37. Right. So maybe I guess I could give them a chance.
Yep.
So that would be my recommendation. Even, you might not need to invest in software, but it couldn't hurt to make an Excel spreadsheet of all the candidates, so that way you can keep track of how they're doing.
Exactly. And what I would also, just to add on to that point, Steve, because I think it's perfect, much like we assigned those percentages earlier on in our discussion where, okay, this is how much of your time is going to be spent doing this particular activity. I think it makes sense to also assign that same weight to different aspects of the candidate that you're looking for. So again, like statistical relevance is so vital in everything that we do in business, but particularly with a role, right? Like if, for instance, let's say that you're hiring like an L3 support engineer, if it's really important for them to be technically strong and not have a massive personality, then I would put, okay, it's 80% is based on this person's technical aptitude and 10% of it is based on their personality. So if you walked away from an interview and they weren't extremely, they weren't like really lively, and, they weren't necessarily motivating, or they didn't bring, a ton of energy, but they did have 10 years of experience in technology 1, technology 2, technology 3, and they asked they answered a couple specific questions with knockout specific answers, very dry to the point. Then she's like, okay, even though they might not be the perfect personality fit, like, man, what's a lot more important for this role is their technical aptitude, which they knocked out of the park, which we are weighting a lot more heavily with this role. I think like just having those weights associated, because I think when we create like a list, right? and we check a box as either a yes or a no, like there's not a ton of nuance that's associated with that, right? Whereas, if the yes that you check is worth 90 points and the no that you check is only worth 2, you want to make sure that that's being adequately captured, right? That the 1-to-1 isn't directly correlated.
That's great advice. And I want to talk about hiring here in just a couple minutes. Before we get into that, I just want to kind of put a bow on the weeding out candidates experience. Some MSPs, especially the smaller ones, might not realize why it's important for them to give all these ridiculous sounding steps in order to weed out candidates. Sure, part of it is to help you reduce the number of people you have to interview. But the real reason behind that is you need to make sure that these people can follow instructions, and that they're not the kind of person that rushes into things without thinking. Perfect example is, you read the first half of an email, you hit reply, you send it, and then, oh crap, I was supposed to also include this, and I didn't know that until the second half of the email. So let me just hit a reply and send that information too. I'm sure that'll be fine, right? No, that person got weeded out because they jumped the gun, and they're not using critical thinking well enough this early in the hiring process. Would you agree with that?
Certainly, and I think you nailed it. So just along those lines in particular, especially when you're at the top of the funnel and you're weeding people out, what I tell the team is nothing is everything, but everything is something. So very much like, to use your example, Steve, if people are quick on the trigger, or we intentionally have like in the messages that we send people, we intentionally have it be a multi-step process. It's like an if this, then that. If people are just rushing through that, it's not necessarily an immediate no, but if they're not following those directions and they're applying for a job, it's definitely something. It's something to be aware of, right? Because that you should be paying attention. You should be following steps very, very specifically, because you're engaging in an interview process in those activities. So it's not something, that a great candidate is going to be taking lightly.
Perfect. All right, let's talk about the interview process. So we've narrowed it down to 6,412 candidates, and we're going to start interviewing them one at a time with 1-hour interviews. We should be done by the time we retire.
That was a perfect lead-in. Thank you. Well played.
All right. So when interviewing candidates, everybody's looking for something different, right? Like this MSP, maybe they want somebody super technical because they're looking for an L3. That MSP, maybe they're looking for an L1, and they're like, you know what, technical stuff can be trained as long as they have the aptitude for it. I want to see like what kind of troubleshooting skills they may have. They might not know the answer, but can they like think about this logically to get to the answer? Exactly. More importantly, I want to hire somebody that has really great social skills. I want a social butterfly that makes all of my clients feel warm and fuzzy. So different people are looking for different things, and that's okay, because different roles require different types of people. So with that said, before you start interviewing, you should have a plan, right?
Definitely. Yeah. So, first of all, great. Yeah. So we'll be done interviewing folks when we retire. We're on the fast track here. So yeah, I guess the next step in that pipeline progression or progressing folks down through that funnel is going to be the interview process. Now, I have my own thoughts, and I'll just kind of walk you through how I think about it. But one of the first things that we do, even prior to the interview, some people are for this, some people aren't. Of course, it definitely makes sense if you're going to be in a remote sort of a setting and role, and a lot of things are going to be done over video. But Steve, we ask people, we have a canned question, and that question is just explain to me a difficult hurdle that you had to overcome in your last role. What was the issue? How did you solve it? Why did you solve it the way that you did? And what were the results? We asked people to answer that via a video interview. So we just have them record a Loom, or if they prefer to do it on their phone or their PC, whatever. And what's nice about that is, number one, you get the answer to a question. That's a pretty good question, right? You get to see how people react to some sort of like a stress or turmoil. But then number two, you start to get into, how the person, like what their presence looks like, how they enunciate. You can get a feel for the passion or how someone feels when they answer a question like that. And it's a different sort of an engagement when you get a recording, when you see someone, when you can, see that video rather than them just necessarily answering a question. So what I recommend is if you're not asking for any sort of like a screening video, perhaps think about working that in. And it's really easy. You can like have everyone who applies to this role answer that same question. You just get a lot of additional data points that help you, again, continue to weed down or get to know a little bit faster, right?
So I believe truly that I was blessed with high intuition. For some reason, I'm able to like read all the little micro expressions on people's faces. I kind of like, I just know what's happening before they say what's happening. Not with everything, but like I can tell like, oh, this person just had a fight with their spouse or, whatever. Like as I'm walking around town, like I can just tell for some reason. And when I ask people, I'm right, like every time. So with all that said, because I have high intuition, I would use my intuition as a superpower when interviewing people.
Yeah.
That is not a superpower that everybody has. In fact, that's not a superpower that most people have. Yeah. So how do people with low intuition, and that's not a dig at you guys, okay? Don't take it that way. But how do people with low intuition intuit?
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So that's everyone is, everyone's going to have a different answer to that question, but here's how I would frame it, and at least how I think about it, right? Is so after you get that Loom video interview, honestly, Steve, everyone that I hire in every first like in-person or video interview that I hold, where we're actually going to be on the same call or sitting in the same room and engaging, I always have that first meeting only be 15 minutes. And that is because I think whether or not you have that really high intuition, like you have been blessed with, congratulations, by the way, that is a superpower. For us just laymen here, I think a good way to think about that intuition is see how that person makes you feel, right? And it can just be as simple as that. If you are in a meeting with someone for a particular role, and usually we can suss this out relatively quickly. Like it doesn't even take the full 15 minutes, but the 10 or the 15 minutes, you can generally get a feel for how they're going to fit into your company, how they're going to fit in with the other team members that they're going to have to work with, how they're going to be able to engage with your customers, your clientele. You as the business owner, or you as that hiring manager, you're going to just innately know whether or not that person is a fit. And it's oftentimes it's tough to articulate. These aren't qualitative metrics, right? This isn't you've been in the industry for 5 years. You have been in L3 here. You use these technologies. This is literally okay. Like how is this person making me feel using that level of intuition? What I always take advantage of, or how I frame the first round of interviews that we have with people, or direction, or in general, is think of this as truly that cultural fit. If this person is going to make sense on the team or not, and keep that short, because usually if you don't know, you know pretty quickly. Now, if things are going really well and you want to extend that interview, you can always go over that 15-minute mark. But what I would say is almost input what you're describing as intuition with how that person makes you feel. And that can be like a nice proxy for round number one, whether or not it makes sense for them to progress on, talk a little bit more specifically about the role, the technologies, everything else that's going to be associated.
All right. Now, at some point, we should probably get our employees involved, our other team members, during this interview process. And the reason I say that is because you never know, maybe one of them has really good intuition.
Yep.
And more importantly, you want to make sure that culturally this person is a fit. And I don't mean culturally like religious or like weird like culture things. Or I don't mean weird. I'm sorry. I just mean like, are they going to fit well with the company culture that you have hopefully curated?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that makes sense just around this same time. What's nice is if you have your little systems in place and you're doing all the things that we had just mentioned, you have a bunch of data points that you can already share with people. So you'll be able to, of course, have a resume. They'll have answered a few specific questions. You'll have like a little Loom that you can share with them, some sort of a video interview. If you've had the culture fit, like we record all of our meetings now. You can use like Fireflies or Read AI. You can share that little 10-minute chat that you had with folks as well. But I'm absolutely a huge believer in sharing that with the team, especially not only if they're going to be a direct manager, but folks that are like, that they're going to be working with on a regular basis. Because that's everything. That's another reason why, Steve, I feel really like I'm passionate about making sure that you get to know who the person is on the other side of the interview table. I feel like that's again, it almost goes back to the misaligned expectations, right? Is a lot of times during an interview process, and people shouldn't do this, but it turns into that, is people are tight and the candidate is oftentimes trying to be what they think the company wants them to be, or what that company or what that hiring manager wants them to be. And of course, there's always going to be a certain level of professionalism, and you are interviewing for a role. This person's going to hire you and pay you and have expectations. Like that level of professionalism needs to be there. But you also are going to have to work with this person every single day, like ideally for years to come. So you have to know who they are, and that culture fit has to be there. So I'm completely with you around this point of the interview process, assuming that they are moving forward. Now's the time where you share this information with other members of the team, run things by them, and either have like a cumulative chat or set up like a quick, a quick 10-minute, 15-minute screening session with those folks as well. It's absolutely vital. And it doesn't have to be, I frankly shy away from the hour-long. It's a really long commitment with those team members. Just keep it to 15, 20 minutes. You can get a lot of information in that amount of time. It's not a heavy lift.
So one of my favorite things to talk about is red flags. What are some red flags to watch out for during an interview? Feel free to share some like crazy story if you have one.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the one place that I would start off with is trust your gut, right? So you could call it intuition. I could call it how this person makes you feel. But if there's ever a circumstance where something just doesn't feel right, like listen to that and don't shoo it off. Don't act like it's not there, it doesn't exist, or it's not real, because oftentimes it is. I think it's like joking around. It's like your subconscious is really like making 80% of the calls that are happening. Like your conscience is like that 20%. If there's something that doesn't feel right, like that's your subconscious screaming at you in its own little way. Hey, just be aware here. Something's not adding up. Something's not making sense. So that I would say that would be number one, and then number two, the negativity is tough for me too. So
oh boy,
if it's specifically talking badly about a prior circumstance or the people that were involved or anything along those lines, that's always going to be a little bit of a red flag, without a doubt.
Yeah, I would say red flags. Maybe you lean one way politically and this person's very vocal about leaning a different way. I mean, there's all sorts of red flags that you could see in these interviews, and I want to stress, like, especially like that political thing. Don't ever settle on a candidate. Like, they may be off the charts technically. They may be everything you're looking for in an L3 engineer, except their personality. Like, don't ever settle that much, because what you're going to do is you're going to cause unrest, and you're going to truly screw up your company culture that, again, you have curated so well up to this point.
Yep. Yep. Extremely, extremely important.
All right, let's talk about money for a minute. So earlier we mentioned, we assume you've already got all of your ducks in a row when it comes to like bringing somebody on board. But let's talk about maybe some like out of the box thinking here. I'm looking for somebody that's capable of being an L3, and maybe in my area an L3 goes for, let's say, 120,000, but I've only got the budget for an $80,000 salary.
Mm-hmm.
What can I offer to interest better talent in a lower salary gig? And I don't mean like, how can I trick them? I mean, what can I offer that doesn't suck?
Yeah. Well, so my gosh, it's like just radical transparency. Ask them, Steve. Like that's if they're, because here's the thing. If you've ever made it down to far into an interview period, and both of you guys or girls are really like, you like the other side, so the vibe check is passed. This person is technically capable. They're going to fit in perfectly with the culture. I introduced them to 3 other team members. They hit it off with all of them. They're familiar with our systems. It's going to be a great fit. That sort of thing's rare, right? So that's like candidates aren't bumping into that good of a setup. Excuse me. Everywhere that they're like, every place that they're interviewing, everywhere that they're chatting with. So if you're this far down along the road, like, open up a dialogue and ask them. And some people, if it's just about money, then you might have to get creative there. But oftentimes it'll, like, maybe they're just looking for some additional flexibility. Maybe they want Friday afternoons off. Mm-hmm. That's not the end of the world. Maybe they want unlimited PTO or something along those lines. I think that
let's be honest though.
Yeah.
Depending on what way you look at it, that's either a 50% or a 33% disparity in salary, going from 80 to 120. So you probably have listed salary range on your job listing. If not, you should, because that's going to be, in my opinion, a good way to weed out the people who think they're worth more than you can afford.
Yep.
But then at the same time, maybe you could convince a guy who wants 120 that your $80,000 role is worth it. If you don't list, I don't know, man. Like, and maybe that's something where you need to list some of the perks on the job role in advance. So I guess that's what I was thinking is, I'm looking for the creme de la creme, but I want the Tesla, and I can afford a Chevy Equinox. So which things can I add to my job listing to get the creme de la creme to even consider applying? Because if they're not applying, I'm only going to get the best of what applied. I'm not going to get the best. So how do I get the best to apply?
Yeah, I think another thing that you want to that you could highlight, or like, again, the creme de la creme is always going to be upward mobility, right? Mm-hmm. So, hey, if you come into this role, you may only be starting here, but you have the opportunity to earn this much based on these metrics being met, which you also are highlighting in the job description, and you not only meeting but achieving those expectations everywhere, like things along those lines. I think when it comes to pricing or cost, like all that stuff is negotiable, which I would just also recommend that people think about is let's not trip over dollars to try and save pennies. If you find someone that's great, like I would always recommend like pay that great person. You're never going to regret that. I think Jerry Jones has the saying, right? He's like, everything that I've gotten in life, that's great, I've overpaid for, and it's been worth every single penny, right? So keep that in mind from an owner standpoint. The other thing I'd say, Steve, is if the dollars, if you're looking for people that in like cost in your market, they're just more expensive than what you're able to afford, I'd highly consider, unless they have to be there, in office, 5 days a week, or it's something where, you're sending remote techs out on site, et cetera. Like remote hiring is a great option because you're able to get folks, and this could be specifically in the US, or you could get folks overseas that don't live in the US, don't operate on the US dollar, and you can take advantage of some currency arbitrage. That's exactly what we do. You get people that have been in the industry for a long time, have the exact same experience with the exact same technologies, just at a fraction of what the cost may be equivalent in the US.
Chris, is that a shameless plug?
That was a shameless plug, but only because you brought up the cost a couple times.
I did, man. Honestly, I did it so that way we could talk about that for a second. Yeah. So there's a few things to consider. One, does your company allow for you to bring in staff from a different region? And that different region could be, hey, we got an MSP in California. Cost of living is outrageous. We want to hire someone from Ohio. That's a great way to save money. But then if you're in Ohio, there's not much down to go from there, short of, okay, can I look for people in a different country? And if so, what country fits? And you say South Africa because they have a more Western culture. So they watch Hollywood shows, they listen to LA music, they are in our culture. They understand our slang for the most part because it's on, TV and movies. They get us. They have a cool accent too.
They do. It's great.
So something to keep in mind, though, is if your company is really big into compliance, for example, CMMC, all of your staff have to be American, or at least all of the staff that touch that company. You could build a firewall around that client or those clients that require CMMC. And I honestly, I don't know what that looks like, but that's an option. But does that really help you if you hire someone and they can't touch your most critical clients? So that's something to think about. Do you have any thoughts or insights on that?
Yeah, so that on the CMMC stuff, that's definitely a one-off type of basis. What I do, I guess what I chat with people about, Steve, and you did a great job of highlighting it, is so like I've been messing around with outsourcing or using folks overseas since before it was cool, right? So for 12 years since I've been building companies, and I guess how I describe it is, I just want to go back to 2014, which is the first time that I had done it. I'll just tell a quick story, but I remember, so we were bootstrapping a digital advertising company. It was myself and one other guy. And we got to the point where we had the business was expanding pretty dramatically. You got to keep in mind, this is 2014, right? So we were working with a bunch of folks in real estate, and digital, Facebook and these digital platforms were just starting to come out, and they were just starting to get adopted. So anyone who was going to market was sending out, mailers or things like that. They weren't very effective. So we were coming in and saying, hey, we could advertise, generate leads for you online, and then be very specific about where all the stuff, what your customer acquisition costs are, which ads are performing well, and what the return on ad spend is, all this stuff. And it blew people's minds 10 years ago, right?
Mhm.
Well, we got to the point where we needed help, scaling the business, but we didn't have the money to pay someone in the United States. I was like, oh man, like I can't pay someone, back then it was like $50,000-$60,000 a year. We don't have the budget for it. So I talked with a handful of people. They're just like, oh, like talk to this person overseas. She's helped me in the past. I think like she's going to be able to help you. I remember I ended up talking with her name was Karen, and we brought her on board, and she already knew like the question, the problems that we were going to have, and in the like the in the way, the waterfall effect that we were going to have them. Anyway, long story short, we brought her on for paying a fraction of $10 an hour, like significantly less than what we would in the US. And she solved all the problems and even knew where they were coming from before we had them, right? So the fast forward, I've worked with 10 different countries, 15 different projects, people from all over the world. South Africa is really nice for all the reasons that you just mentioned, right? Their accent's incredible, very, very Western culture. Everyone that we work with, they're only 6 hours ahead, and generally we have them standardized on East Coast time. And what I found is it's still like you get the same value, but having that communication is everything, especially Steve, in this space. You're going to be talking with people that have technical problems. There can't be that, it can't be tough to communicate, and it's not with these particular resources.
And I got to say, starting work at 3 a.m. is not necessarily the most desirable thing, but being done working, like by the time people in the US start eating lunch, by the time people in your country start eating lunch, that's what I meant. That's pretty dope, because that leaves you a lot of daylight hours to get a lot done.
And it's huge opportunity for them too. It's like we have to keep in mind that unemployment in the US is minimal right now. And in South Africa, it's over 30%. So
I just looked that up. So full disclosure, I had a different company that does similar to what you do on in the last couple of weeks, and I just looked that up, and I was blown away. What is South Africa's unemployment rate? And I thought it was higher than 30.
I think it's in
No, you're right. It's currently about 33%, and it just blows my mind. And the youth unemployment, 15 to 24, is at 59.7%.
It's wild.
So the people that need to enter the workforce most can't. So good for you helping them out. We've got just a couple minutes left. I want to ask one probably tough question for most. How do I handle salary negotiations to keep both the candidate and my budget happy?
Certainly. Here again, I think transparency is always going to be your best bet. So what I do always recommend to people, and I understand like you have budgets and those budgets need to be stuck to, but what you don't ever want to do is like try to like lose a great employee or lose someone who's really good that you've already spent all this time, effort, and energy bringing on over a few $1,000s.
Right.
It's not a good way to start a relationship with someone that you're ideally going to have a relationship with for years to come. I always just err on the fact of, be really, be ruthless with who you allow to get to that level of the negotiation. But once you're there, like do what you have to do to land the person. And if that's, potentially pay maybe a little bit more than what you're comfortable with, generally that ends up working out. Right. So that's what I would say. And then I would also keep in mind, everything is negotiable, right? So if you can't budge on the salary, see, is there vacation time? Is there something else that you could add in to really sweeten that pot? Just ask people, they'll tell you. But don't ever just let the salary or something like that, like potentially fumble one of these deals, because it's just, that's the most sad way to end one of those processes,
Yeah. And I just want to reiterate that sometimes it's worth just paying that person an extra few $1,000s or seeing if there's something else you can add. Maybe they would be happy to just get commission on things that they're upselling to your clients. or maybe you could look into some type of profit sharing with your team. If you have, obviously you can't do that if your profit margin is already slim, but if your company has healthy profit margins and you're looking to really retain your talent, throw them an extra few thousand bonus every quarter or something, because you guys are killing it.
Yep. And I think, Steve, like tying those to specific incentives, that always helps too, because that's how you can create that win-win type of environment. If you don't want to budge on the salary and that's going to be where it is, that's fine. But if you want to potentially tell us, hey, look, you can earn this extra amount of money and get to that OTE that you're looking for, but they're going to be tied to these incentives, that ends up being a win-win for everyone. So you can always be, you can always be strategic in that way, especially, at the very end of the negotiation.
Absolutely. Well, hey guys, you can go to hirexe.com, hirexe.com, to reach Chris, to connect with him, to learn more about what he's doing at Hirexe. And I think you should. Chris is a nice guy.
So, well, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. I would agree.
Absolutely. Normally, I would send people to your channel program profile, but you don't have one yet. And we're going to talk about getting you one after we wrap up this call.
Working on that right now.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, thanks so much for watching, everyone. We will catch you next Wednesday at the next MSP Tutor. Take care, guys.